So hello, my name is Anna Maria Hubert, and I'm an assistant professor at the Faculty of Law at the University of Calgary in Canada. And I'm also an associate fellow at the Institute for Science, Innovation and Society at the University of Oxford. And in this presentation, I hope to provide a brief overview of the key governance gaps for proposed SRM technologies and how and where they could be addressed. As a starting point, it's useful to ask, what do we mean when we talk about governance? Governance is a comprehensive and inclusive concept that tends to evade precise definition. However, it generally refers to the interactions amongst norms, structures, and processes that determine how power and responsibilities are exercised, how decisions are taken, and how citizens and other stakeholders have their say. As noted in the IPCC's definition pictured here on the screen, governance is multi-layered, and it takes into account a wide range of actors, including governments, governmental and non-governmental organizations, the private sector, and citizens. And the governance scholarship identifies a number of benchmarks of good environmental governance, including things like legitimacy, transparency, accountability, inclusiveness, fairness, integration across different levels and organizations, capability, and adaptability. And so these elements are frequently referred to in the literature on SRM. As noted in the previous presentation, Solar Radiation Modification, or SRM, refers to a group of technological proposals that seek to reduce the amount of solar energy absorbed in the climate system. This introductory lecture discusses governance with respect to the entire category of SRM proposals generally. However, an important caveat to bear in mind is that each of these technological proposals may raise very different jurisdictional and legal considerations relevant to their governance. We may come up with a very different set of answers for each of these technologies when we ask questions such as, where is the activity likely to take place? Is it on land, in the sea, or in the air? Is the activity likely to occur within areas of national jurisdiction or in areas beyond national jurisdiction? What are the effects felt? Are they localized, transboundary, or global in scope? Who is likely to undertake the activity? Will it be a country or a private individual or even a company? And what legal norms apply, if any? It is also important to consider the potential role of existing legal regimes and institutions in addressing governance gaps related to SRM. For the most part, existing international law is largely silent on the regulation of SRM measures and their development. For example, there are significant gaps in existing international law suggesting the need for further cooperation at the international level to promote effective, legitimate, and fair governance of these emerging climate technologies. A very similar situation exists at the domestic level. At the same time, we are not starting from a blank slate, and surveys of the international legal landscape, for example, show that there are a number of general norms of international law, treaties, and soft law instruments, as well as international institutions with mandates relevant to geoengineering. These cut across many different subject areas of international law and policy, including international environmental law, human rights law, international peace and security, international development, food security, and the law of the sea. So a number of specific governance questions may be asked in relation to SRM, including what should be the aims and objectives of SRM governance? Who should promote and adopt governance measures? At which level? In which forum? At whom should governance be directed? And what should be the legal form of the governance response? And I will address each of these different elements in turn. The first question of what should be the aims of SRM governance is clearly a normative one that depends on how the problem is framed and perceived. The question also presumes that SRM is a problem that requires governance, and moreover, that it might be given some priority for decision makers on an already full policy agenda. It is important to also underscore that at present we have very limited direct political input into the question of the need for scope and content of SRM governance. In other words, we're currently operating in a bit of a black box with respect to the aims, this question of what should be the aims of SRM governance. Nonetheless, the literature identifies several possible goals of SRM governance, including to promote the development and/or use of SRM measures to offset the significant risks of climate change, to restrict the development and/or use of SRM measures to prevent risks to the environment or violations of human rights, to guarantee that citizens and groups have access to information about SRM and the right to participate in decision-making, as well as access to judicial processes and review, and to promote international cooperation and coordination of SRM measures. It's also necessary to consider issues such as which actors and institutions should advance SRM governance, based on which criteria, which level is most appropriate to promote and adopt governance measures for SRM. The literature on SRM governance identifies a number of different actors that could play a role in the formation of SRM governance, including states, such as a major global power acting alone or through multilateral cooperation amongst states, international institutions and treaty bodies, non-state actors such as scientific bodies, national scientific academies, environmental or other NGOs. And it's important to point out here that a number of jurisdictional considerations arise in relation to this element of governance, such as concerns of foreign shopping and the protection of the global commons, that bear upon the question of who should promote and adopt governance. We also need to ask the question, at whom should governance be directed? Traditionally, international law governs the relations between sovereign states. Therefore, for example, legal or governance measures at the international level may seek to prevent a unilateral deployment of SRM by individual countries acting alone through the imposition of an authorization requirement, although this would be quite difficult given the voluntary nature of international law. There's also discussion in the literature about the possibility that SRM may be carried out by non-state actors. For example, governance may be required to prevent the so-called green finger scenario, in which a private individual or group of individuals, or even a corporation, undertakes SRM on its own. This would be akin to the Haida Gwaii ocean fertilization experiment that we saw take place in 2013 off the west coast of Canada. There's also conjecture by some scholars that SRM could be carried out by a group of coordinated social activists who may decide to deploy SRM collectively in the face of runaway climate change. For each of these various scenarios, the design of governance may look very different. Another consideration is what legal form SRM governance should take. Should it be legally binding or not, for example? The literature on SRM governance covers a range of possibilities, including the adoption or modification of a treaty, domestic legislation, regulations, and other measures and policies, promotion and adoption of voluntary soft law standards, for example, through the adoption of recommendations or decisions by an international organization, or a private code of conduct, or some combination of the above. This is really only a sort of brief snapshot of what governance might look like and the different considerations that come into play. But I thought I would leave this presentation with a few concluding thoughts. First, there is no need to reinvent the wheel. Existing legal norms and processes, including at the international level, are likely to frame the terms of the debate about SRM governance. However, the more novel aspects of SRM may require additional bespoke governance arrangements. Second, cooperation. There is a very real risk that SRM technologies may be implemented unilaterally with unequally distributed global, regional, or transboundary effects. And this indicates a possible need for some level of international cooperation and coordination on SRM governance. Third, technology and human rights. SRM governance will need to reckon with not only the issues of the prevention of physical harms to the environment, but also the need for decision-making to be legitimate, inclusive, and democratically accountable and respect human dignity. Fourth, is this an either-or proposition, or will SRM governance reflect polycentricity? And polycentricity is defined as a social system of many governance centers having limited and autonomous prerogatives and operating under an overarching set of rules. And so we may see multi-layered public-private governance develop. And of course, there is some literature on this topic already, which you can see in my reference slide. So I know we'll be discussing these issues as a group later, and so I've also created some questions as prompts for things we might discuss during this session. Here's a list of references and suggested reading if you're interested in learning more about this topic. And thank you very much for your time and attention, and I look forward to your questions.